Alright, I am back with another video, and yeah, you probably could already tell by the thumbnail, today's a weird one. So this was originally going to be a karlach build, in which I used the Storm Herald Barbarian and its Fire Aura to kind of make a fun karlach themed build, but then I realised I didn't really want to make another monk barbarian video back to back, but let me know if you would like to see that, because it would kind of be an update to my original origin build. But no, one of the more popular requested ones from the last video when I said, let me know what subclass you want to see next, was actually, to my surprise, Battlerager Barbarian, which is kind of a black sheep amongst the tabletop barbarian subclasses, as it's kind of known as being a bit of a weird one. Because it's restricted to dwarves. At least when it was first released, only dwarves could take this subclass. Obviously, it's a bit strange to restrict a class or subclass based on your species or race as it was known at the time, and so it felt a bit strange. Now, luckily for us, the mod does not have that restriction. You don't have to play as a dwarf, but there is a little Easter egg if you do so, according to the mod developer, Some Ragnarov, who is absolutely amazing, and I know I butchered that name again. But otherwise, I did want to kind of give this one a go, because it's actually interesting. You'll see as we get into the class abilities and such like that, why this one actually has some interesting utility to it, and why it creates such an interesting playstyle that's going to befit a wrestler. Yeah, no, this build is going to get a bit strange. It's very unique, surprisingly strong. Might take a little bit of weird leveling and strategies to get it kind of working at the most optimal level, but it's definitely usable. This is going to be quite a fun video overall. So like I say, today we're going to be making this kind of masked wrestler character who is a dwarf to pay homage to the original origins of the subclass. But I'm not going to keep you guys for too long. Let's get straight into the build. Kicking things off, we are going to play as a dwarf today. It can be any dwarf, but I've decided to go with Dwargar today. Playing a dwarf is going to give you access to proficiencies with battle axes, hand axes, light hammers, and war hammers. I mean, we already get that from Barbarian anyway, but if you choose not to start as Barbarian and choose to start as our other class instead, you will still have access to these weapon types if you so choose. We also gain dark vision as well as dwarven resilience, giving us resistance to poison damage and advantage on saving throws against being poisoned. We also have the Dwargar as our sub-race of choice. And this is going to come for a few specific reasons that I'll get into as the build develops, but we do get some nice stuff right off the bat. First of all, we're going to get superior dark vision, improving our dark vision's range, as well as Dwargar resilience, so we have advantage on saving throws against illusions and against being charmed or paralyzed. I like the idea of having advantage on saving throws against illusions as a wrestler. Maybe you get to kind of see through things that are actually fake, which maybe in wrestling might be important. I'm not going to say exactly why just yet. But anyways, we are going to be kicking things off as a barbarian today, allowing us to rage, dealing extra damage with our attacks, as well as gaining an armored defense that's going to use our constitution. We're actually wearing medium armor today, though, because this subclass requires medium armor. Again, this is a very weird one, but it is fun to use. Moving on to our ability scores. Again, another weird one. Strength is at 8, but we do need it for this build. So, yes, today this is a build that is going to use the giant strength potions. They are optional. As you can see, we are also using the club of hill giant strength here to give us a base 19 strength, even when we don't have the potions, so you can still make use of this build regardless. However, I did also want to make use of the potions, because the thing is with Battlerager is it's about grappling, and the closest thing we have to that in BG3 is throwing, so we're going to be throwing people today as part of our kind of wrestling, which I think kind of makes sense. So you're going to want as much strength as possible, and to do that, you're going to be taking the giant strength potions. In the early game, you can get one that sets your strength to 21, and in the late game, you can get one that sets your strength to 27. That's the one that we're going to be aiming for in the end game for sure. So while our strength is at 8, it's actually at 27, which I think is kind of cool. I know most people don't like builds that rely on these potions, and that is totally valid. I myself avoided it for the longest time, but for a build like this, it just makes sense. I also like the idea of maybe this guy was once a famous wrestler in a WWE style ring, and maybe Faerun has its own version of the show, kind of just like a funny comedic thing, and maybe he did fall from grace, and in the end, when he kind of maybe he was getting older, perhaps this is an older dwarf, and as he kind of got older, his body was less capable, so he started dosing up on giant potions to become as strong as he once was to be able to get back into the ring, but then of course gets kidnapped by the Nautiloid, and now we're searching for these potions to get our strength back, as well as as, you know, reliving the glory days by actually wrestling freaking bugbears and, like, using our wrestling skills to actually fight for real, which I think is a really cool kind of way of flavouring this build. But anyways, that's why strength is at 8. Moving on. Dexterity is at 16 because we are actually going to be using a medium armour that has an uncapped dexterity modifier, so we might as well get a little bit more armour class and better initiative. Constitution is at 15 because we are going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Intelligence and wisdom are both at 8 because we don't really need them, although that low wisdom is hurting me a little bit. And charisma is at 17 because we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Moving on to our skill proficiencies, I did go with the soldier background, not for any particular thing. I would definitely say entertainer also does make sense for this build, but we would get the proficiencies from entertainer later, and I do want the athletics and intimidation proficiencies now. We especially want that athletics proficiency because we're going to need that to be able to throw people, because throwing people is an athletics check. We're also going to get perception and survival from our barbarian skills as well, and that's level 1. Now, for this next level, you might want to, for flavour reasons, take a quick 1-level multi-class dip before we commit more to a full multi-class later, so I'll show that off now. At the end of the day, wrestling is about showmanship. It's about, you know, putting on a good performance as much as it is taking down your opponent. I'm talking about this in the idea of WWE-style wrestling, you know, where there's storylines and theatrics and all that. That's more what we're going for here. Maybe not so much in, like, actual on-the-floor rough-and-tumble wrestling, but, you know, I'm building a bit more of a showman here, so we are going to go with a Barbarian today. Adding a Bard level at this point is just going to give us a few extra things. It's going to give us the ability to play instruments, of which I'm picking a hand drum, because imagine this dude playing his own, you know, entrance theme, banging on a drum as he comes in. It's like a war drum type deal, and it, like, hypes him up for his fight and, like, all that. It's just a fun little thing. Really, you can pick any of them, but I like the drum in this case. As well as it's going to give us access to a couple of cantrips. Now, I am going to be going for 2 things. One is going to be Vicious Mockery, because of course we have to taunt our opponents in the ring. That's just how wrestling works, I mean, come on. As well as the Friends cantrip to give us advantage on charisma checks, which will become important a bit later. We're also going to be grabbing some spells, and of course we have a high charisma stat, so really you can grab anything you want, but I am going to grab some things that I think will be useful for wrestling, because of course this is a Barbarian. We can't cast or concentrate on spells while we're raging. That is going to kind of inflict some restrictions. However, some that we can pick up right away that are great for utility are Longstrider to give us more movement speed, makes up for the fact that we're a dwarf. Featherfall, so we can do a big superhero landing style entrance if we so desire, and it doesn't matter so much if we get thrown somewhere because we'll land quite nicely. We're also going to pick up Speak with Animals because you got to entertain everyone, even the dog. And finally, your last one could be whatever you want, but I actually think since wrestling is, let's just say, a coordinated event, let's go with Command, so you can force your enemies to follow your movements, make them flee, drop to the ground, drop their weapon, or freeze or come closer to you, so you can do whatever wrestling move you want to them. I don't know, I think that's just kind of fun. Like, imagine like you using the command spell to choreograph a wrestling match. I know I said this build was dumb, but I actually think I'm a genius. Moving on, we are going to get an ability score, and we are actually going to grab Persuasion here. Persuasion, I think, is going to work really, really nicely. We can pick this up later, but I think picking it up now is great. It gives us another charisma skill. However, I would also say acrobatics or sleight of hand both make sense at this juncture as well, but we're going to grab Persuasion early on because we can make good use of it. And of course, we now have really high charisma with intimidation and persuasion, making our barbarian checks very fun. As you all know, I love the barbarian charisma checks in this game. They're very fun. For now, though, I want to focus on getting our base wrestling moveset, so we're going to go back to Barbarian for Danger Sense, giving us advantage on dex saves against traps, spells, and services, just a nice defensive buff, and Reckless Attack, which probably won't really matter so much for us, because we're not really going to be using weapons, and if you're needing advantage to hit with upwards of a 27th strength score, yeah, there's something probably wrong with the build. This never ever came up in practice, so it's just kind of here. However, at total level 3, we're going to get Enlarge, grow in size to become stronger. You gain advantage on ability checks and saving throws using strength, and weapon attacks deal an additional 1d4 damage. So now we get to grow big and chuck people even harder. Now we're wrestling with things that are much bigger than us. Just imagine putting a friggin' dragon in a headlock. That's the kind of shit we're talking about here. I don't know. I just love Enlarge. Like, think about it. Like, if you have a WWE style wrestling in Faerun, in the Forgotten Realms, like, they're they're gonna use spells to put on a spectacle. Imagine this guy's signature move is him becoming larger, and all of a sudden, like, his wrestling moves change, like he could take on people way bigger than himself. I'm sorry, that's a cool idea. That's why I wanted to play as a Dwager. Well, actually, there's even more coming up. Because moving on to level 3, we finally get our subclass. And of course, we're going with Battlerager. Battlerager is just a very fun class overall, and it's going to give us access to a ton of different things. First up, Battlerager Armour. While you are wearing a medium metal armour and are raging, the metal part is just left over from tabletop, it can be any type of medium armour, you can use a bonus action to make one melee weapon attack with your armour spikes against a target within 1.5 meters of you, so about 5 feet. So basically, if you're right next to an enemy, you can now use your bonus action to attack with spikes coming off of your armor. This is where Battlerager's being grapplers comes in, and this is obviously why we have the wrestling inspiration. It's also part of the reason why I chose the armor that I did, because this is one that kind of has spikes on it, but you can obviously play around with that choice. Basically what this means is we're going to have a bonus action attack that is going to do, I believe it's 1d4 plus our strength modifier, which is why it says 3 piercing damage there, because technically, at the moment, our modifier is a -1. Obviously, when we take our potions, that's going to be a lot higher. So we're going to have a pretty powerful bonus action attack that's based around body checking people and slamming them. Basically, you can flavor that any wrestling move you do that normally wouldn't actually really hurt someone, because wrestling is a coordinated sport, fake, means that we are going to be able to actually start doing damage. And I think that's an interesting way for a wrestler character turn his body into a weapon, which is why I wanted to use Battlerager for this purpose. Speaking of, here is our bonus action armor spikes attack, 1d4 plus 1 for us with our strength modifier. You've already gone over how this works. I will say though, if you're running a thief rogue with this build, this is not limited to once per turn, it's just limited to a bonus action, so you could attack twice. Moving on, rage. This is the exact same, nothing changes here. Let's move on. At level 4 Barbarian, we're going to gain access to our total level 5, which means we now have the invisibility spell. Now, this does cost our concentration, but we can use it anytime we like, at least once per battle, but outside of combat, we can use it anytime we like. So this means we now have the ability to RKO out of nowhere. Yeah, I was pretty proud of that one, actually. So yeah, you know, we got invisible. Like, basically, as you would have seen in the combat footage at the start of the video, we go invisible, run up to someone, and then boom, just chuck them before anybody even knows what's going on. It's a very, very fun way to open combat. We're also going to get our first feat at this level, and let's bump up our throws with Tavern Brawler. Tavern Brawler is going to allow us to add our strength modifier twice to the damage and attack rolls of strength-based attacks. So, unarmed attacks is 1, as well as improvised weapons or throwing something. So yeah, every time we throw someone, the person we're throwing them at is going to take double our strength modifier in damage, which is very, very good. I know this is another Tavern Brawler Barbarian build, but hey, it's used in a very different way, and we're also bumping up our constitution here instead, because obviously our strength is going to be a lot higher, and we want to bump up that con. Moving on to level 5 of Barbarian, we're going to get fast movements, and even if you don't use Longstrider, you're going to have a bit more speed, but stack this with Longstrider for even more speed, as well as extra attacks, and now we can throw twice in a turn. And then finally, at Barbarian level 6, we are actually going to get access to Reckless Abandon. When you use Reckless Attack while raging, you also gain 3 temporary hit points. I believe this is equal to your Constitution modifier, so if you bump up your Constitution somehow, maybe with the Amulet of Greater Health if you're not using my other Barbarian builds, then this number will be a lot higher. But hey, 3 temporary HP is better than none. Not the most powerful feature with our setup, as our Constitution isn't really going to level up further beyond this point, but again, you have options. Otherwise, we mainly just want the extra rage charge from here, and at level 7, we're going to get Feral Instinct. I did decide to go with level 7 of Barbarian here, because Feral Instinct is going to prevent us from being surprised, so people can't get the drop on us, and give us a higher initiative score, even with our slightly middling dex, so then we have a higher chance to go first and start throwing people around to where we want them on the battlefield. Overall, this is kind of optional. You could go for a 1-level dip in a different class. Perhaps you want to go for a 1-level dip into Fighter if you have the Fighting Styles Expanded mod to give you a few more options there, like the Unarmed Fighting Style. That could work, but for people who aren't using that mod and want like the least amount of mods possible, you don't need to go down that route, but I would highly recommend it as it would give you the ability to punch as well. Otherwise, you can go to level 7, get a bit more HP, and get Feral Instinct. Or, of course, you could go to level 6 of Bard if you want something from there, like maybe, say, Magical Secrets, but you don't actually need Magical Secrets with this build. I didn't really find that any of the spells in the Magical Secrets list were actually being used, so I think level 7, level 5-7 split makes a bit more sense for the extra HP. Speaking of, now that we are done with our Barbarian levels, let's go back over to Bard. Now you may think, well, why don't we go for 8-4? Well, the thing is, in order to make the most use out of our Bardic Inspiration, we do need to hit Bard level 5, and trust me, it is worth it. So, at level 2 of Bard, we're going to get Jack of all trades, giving us a bit of a bump to our proficiency in things that we're not proficient in, as well as a third short rest, which is very nice for our Barbarian. Maybe you want to combine this with the durable feat and just always have HP. Moving on, we also have spells. We do get to pick another spell at this level, and again, it's kind of entirely up to you what you want to pick here. We do already have pretty much everything. You can grab Heroism, making yourself or a target immune to frightened and gain 5 temporary hit points for each turn. So, I mean, this is a concentration spell, so it's not going to work after you rage, so maybe that won't work for you, but it definitely does feel in line with the rest of the theme. I could also see Tasha's Hideous Laughter, again, as almost like a coordinated thing, knocking your opponent prone, or Pocket Sand. You know, just by saying Pocket Sand, I'm going to pick it. Moving on to Bard level 3, we have our subclass. First up though, we do get to choose a spell, and we're up to level 2 spells at this point. And I'm going to use the one D&D spell list expanded mod. There you go. It's available on all consoles, basically just updates the class spell lists to be more in line with their D&D 2024 counterparts, just giving some balanced, but in my opinion, fun buffs to the spell list of spellcasters. And we're going to be grabbing Aid, because it's a non-concentration spell that's just going to give us more HP for free. 10 extra HP with our level 3 slots, which is what we'll have by the end of this build. What's not to love? I think this just makes sense. It makes sense to have more HP on a Barbarian. It just works. Moving on, we do get to choose our subclass, and I am going to be going with College of Law today. Doesn't really make much sense to go for Valor or Swords, as we're not really going to have an equipped weapon to do the sword flourishes with, but if that is your fancy, you can. We are using the Club of Hill Giant Strength, but we don't really need it here for actual attacks, so the College of Swords might be worth it for you if you want to do some like finesse-based bashing with the club, but you know, it's entirely up to you there. I did kind of plan to flavor the Club of Hill Giant Strength as the steel chair, because by God, he's gone for the steel chair, because we don't actually have a steel chair in Baldur's Gate 3, but the Club of Hill Giant Strength is the leg of a stool. In my opinion, that counts. So if you want to go for the steel chair maneuvers, you can go for College of Swords, but I'm going to go with College of Law because it comes with cutting words. Using your wit, spending your bardic inspiration die to potentially influence attack rolls of opponents, potentially causing them to miss, or your opponent's saving throws as well. It's basically the bardic inspiration inverse that you use on your enemies by throwing out insults at them. And again, if that's not a performer in a wrestling ring, you know, throwing out insults and hyping up the crowd by down-talking their opponent, and then talking up to the audience, getting them to cheer for them, I mean, come on! It just makes sense. And I know what you're thinking, it's the spellcasting class on a Barbarian that can't cast spells most of the time, but still, I think it works, and you will have seen in the combat footage that it is actually effective on those kind of narrow miss hits. Moving on, another benefit of College of Law is it is actually going to give us more skill, proficiencies, and 2 expertise. I absolutely want to grab Intimidation expertise because I think that makes sense for the build, and Athletic expertise because of course that's going to help us with throwing. We're also going to grab Acrobatics because again, we're a wrestler, it makes sense to have Acrobatics, as well as Sleight of Hand and Stealth. Sleight of Hand, again, in my opinion, makes sense for performers who, you know, use misdirection, which wrestlers do as well as Stealth is going to help with our invisibility checks for when we go for that RKO out of nowhere, so I do want to pick it up here. Now you might be thinking, why on earth am I not picking up Deception? Because, you know, wrestling is a fake. Wrestling's fake, okay? Just live with it. I know, everyone knows that at this point, it's just an old joke. But no, we're going to get that at level 4. Trust me. Because at level 4 we get to choose a feat, and we're going with Actor, giving us proficiency and expertise in both deception and performance, as well as the ability, and it also increases our charisma by 1, rounding it up to an 18. I mean, come on, this is just a fun flavor pick. You don't didn't need to take this in the build, but I absolutely had to, because come on. But of course, this is like a flavor pick rather than an optimal pick, so if you don't want to take this, you can drop charisma down to 16, put those extra points into something else, and take something else that you think would work well. Athlete for increased jump distance. You could go for Savage Attacker, because technically we're making a lot of attacks in a turn. Tough for more HP. You could go with maybe even Crusher, I guess. We're not really doing bludgeoning damage, though. Yeah, maybe not, because it's piercing damage. You've got a lot of options available, too. You could go for Fighting Initiative if you want that fighting style without the fighter dip. You got a lot of good stuff available to you. You could even go for something like, Charger, if you do want to take advantage of the weapon to be able to do, like, a charging attack. You got a lot of stuff available to you, but come on. I've got to play true to the character here. We're taking the active feat. Maybe it's a bit late into the build. I don't know. I like it here, though. Moving on, we do get to choose another cantrip, and I actually think Mage Hand makes a lot of sense here. Again, imagine all the fun shenanigans that can be caused with Mage Hand in a wrestling ring. Like, imagine you get handed the steel chair by your own spectral floating hand. Like, come on. That visual alone should make you want to pick this. Even Mage Hand has fun utility on this build. But anyways, moving on, we do get to choose another level 2 spell. And I'll be honest, I kind of like picking up Enlarge Reduce here, because we can only use the base Enlarge from our race once per long rest, although that version doesn't require concentration, so you can rage with that one, whereas this one does. Maybe having the ability to reduce does also make sense. It can let you crawl into small spaces and such like that, so Enlarge Reduce can absolutely work. In my testing, I actually did take Mirror Image, because you can cast this before you rage and just have a buff to your armor class for the first few attacks that you take, but I felt like it ran out too quickly, really, for me to really justify taking it. I also did see Enhance Ability as being a good shot, just because it gives you a lot of advantages, like out in the field, like it can give you advantage on like your strength checks if you need to do something with that, and your charisma checks if you need to do something with that. Like, you have a few options there, so Enhance Ability is going to be great for like roleplay stuff and making checks outside of combat, which really is what you're mostly going to be spending your spell slots on here, so I think Enhance Ability works. And finally, at level 5 of Bard, we're going to get Font of Inspiration. Now we get our Bardic Inspiration back on a short rest, as well as a long rest, and it's bumped up to a D8. We also do get to choose a level 3 spell at this point. And really, it's entirely up to you what you want to take here. We kind of have everything already, but there is one spell. Now, I have been told that this spell is useless. There's no reason to ever take this thing. It's a waste of a turn, and even though I used to take it in some builds for flavor reasons, everyone in the comments would always tell me that this spell really should never ever be used. But on this build, could you tell me that there's nothing more perfect than Feign Death? Put yourself or an ally into protective coma, pretend to be dead, becoming resistant to all damage except psychic, and disease and poison will have no effect. And then you get right back up. It's the final act comeback, where you think you're about to be pinned down, but no, you get back up at the last second and the crowd goes wild. You gotta give me this one, guys. Feign Death makes too much sense here. I'm taking it. Fight me. And that. Oh my god, that is the build. So what you're getting out of this is a ton of fun. You're getting all the great stuff of a barbarian throwing build. You're throwing objects, you're throwing steel chairs, you're throwing the other wrestlers into each other, you're having a fun time. But at the same time, you're also throwing out insults, using utility spells to buff you and your party, as well as control the battlefield in some minor way. You come in packed with all the useful utility for social situations, you're bringing a third short rest, you've got expertise in pretty much every charisma skill, I've just realized, which is actually kind of funny. And yeah, you just get to be this high charisma, powerful barbarian wrestler, which can do a ton of damage, and even essentially have amazing battlefield control, because again, you can throw enemies that are light enough pretty much anywhere, and then, like I say, you can even square up to the larger enemies, and you just put on a show. Like, Enlarge and Invisibility, just, there's so many fun applications for that. Like, again, imagine like a Steel Watcher, you're about to fight a Steel Watcher, you just grow large enough to match its bloody size and then start pounding on it. Like, honestly, it's so fun. But yeah, overall, that is the build. I think there is just a ton of fun stuff to work with here. But anyway, let's move on to the equipment, which is obviously where this build will really start to shine. As I already mentioned, we have the Club of Hill Giant Strength from the not-so-steel champ, which is going to, even without a Hill Giant Strength potion, increase our strength to 19. This is just great for a baseline. We effectively have an 18, so even if you don't happen to have any potions on hand, because if you don't know the exact strategy, which people have made videos on, I don't need to go into that, it's a bit of a nightmare to always have to go after potions if you're not, like, kind of used to playing the game already. So this just helps even if you don't have any on hand at that immediate moment, but you should pretty much always do if you know what you're doing, because again, you can pick up the potions of Hill Giant Strength, which give you 21, which is the very minimum amount to be able to throw regular-sized humanoids. You can get that fairly early on in the game, like even as early as a Druid's Grove, if you know what to do, and then these ones can show up in the end game, giving you 27, and again, these last until a long rest, so as long as you manage your resources properly, you should have these strength stats up all the time. Again, you have 3 short rests, so making these potions last longer is going to be a lot easier. But yeah, overall, this is just a great baseline instead to just have in case of an emergency. Moving on to our headpiece, we have the Helmet of Grit. I knew I needed something that resembled a, like, kind of flashy wrestler mask, and you cannot tell me that the Helmet of Grit is not that exactly. It looks like a wrestler mask with, like, you know, like, phoenix feathers embedded in the top. Like, it is the most flashy and showy thing imaginable. But not only that, whenever we, like, kind of hit, like, the second act of the match, and our HP is getting low, below half, and we're starting to look a bit ragged, how will he make the comeback? He'll make the comeback with an additional bonus action, allowing you to attack with your spikes twice per turn. So that's 2 throws or improvised weapon attacks with your main action, and then 2 1d4 plus 10 attacks with your bonus action. Overall, pretty fun little thing there. I don't know, when I saw that this interaction actually worked, it was like the stars aligned. The wrestling mask actually gives us more attack power and utility. That's fucking awesome. But in the early game, you can go for the Cap of Wrath, which will give you Wrath for 2 turns whenever you have 50% or less HP, which Wrath, obviously, gives you a slight buff to your attack power for each turn you have stacked. This doesn't work with throwing. Unfortunately, it only works with melee weapons, but if you smack someone with the club, it will work. It's mainly here to be an early game wrestling mask. Looks slightly less impressive. What has happened to the camera? Hello, camera. Kind of walked towards the wall a bit, but we'll work with it. Obviously, the Helmet of Grit looks a lot better, but this is a nice early game option to just quickly grab if you want a wrestling mask. There's also the Dark Justicia mask as well, which would technically give you a +1 to Intimidation, but it looked kind of goofy, so I decided not to go with that in the end. No specific cloak for this build, but you can wear any cloak you like if you want to. Maybe the Cloak of Protection to round out our AC to a nice even 20. Moving on, though, we have the Unwanted Masterwork Scale Mail for our Act 3 armor, allowing us to add our full dexterity modifier to our armor class, and does not impose disadvantage on stealth checks, meaning that our invisibility is going to work a bit better. It also grants us resistance to fire damage, which is just a nice bonus, as that is a common damage type, meaning that we have 2 resistances on this build. In the early game, though, and this is kind of a fun choice in my opinion, you can go for the Luminous Armor. Whenever the wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a radiant shockwave. I just realized that I forgot this wasn't when you were attacked. It's when you take radiant. It's when you deal radiant damage. Way of dealing radiant damage. God damn it! You know what? I don't have a lot of time to record this video today. What am I doing, man? Look, okay, so there will be a link to a different piece of armor in the description that'll be good as an early game option. I might recommend the Hide Armor +2 immediately, because that's a nice early game armor to grab. There's also the 1T Scale Mail that you can pick up in Act 2. Those are some good options. Don't grab the loot. Like, in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, Radiant Shockwave, you know, you spread the light around. It's like you're hitting them with your Starstruck power, but of course, we're not doing radiant damage, you absolute moron. I'm sorry, it's been a really long week. I worked like a 7-hour workday yesterday, and I am tired. So, you'll have to forgive me for that one. There will be a link in the description to the appropriate armor that I chose. I am such a moron. Never mind! Moving on to gloves that actually work with the build, we have the Gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo, allowing us to deal an additional 1d4 damage with throw attacks and attacks made of improvised weapons. That's just more free damage to most of what we do. No reason not to take it. And finally, the Boots of Speed. The level 10 Battlerager Barbarian feature is to dash as a bonus action, so since we didn't go to level 10, I got it through the boots. Since we could potentially have 2 bonus actions with this build, this just gives us a bit more mobility and freedom to get around the battlefield if we need to, if our enemies are far away. So overall, it's just a nice little speed boost. Moving on to our amulets, we have an amulet that I have never showcased before on this channel, the Absolute Confidence Amulet, giving us a +1 to performance with a -1 to intimidation. This is here purely for flavour. I wanted to show off something I've never shown off in a build, and I feel like the idea of having the Amulet of Absolute Confidence on this build just made sense. Obviously, replace it with whatever you like if you want. I made a recommendation that you could use the Amulet of Greater Health if you wanted on this build, I believe, earlier, so feel free to go with that. Obviously, it would give you more temporary HP, more HP overall, yada yada yada, but really, this is a slot for anything you like, but I just kind of wanted to show this thing off. It's not actually meant to be a solid part of the build, let's say. And finally, we have the Ring of Free Action, so that you cannot be paralyzed or restrained. Your enemies cannot grapple you and pin you to the floor. It's just not possible, and difficult terrain, you know, it's annoying to deal with, so this will help. And finally, the Ring of Flinging, giving you an extra 1d4 bonus to throw damage, so, I mean, that's typical throwing build stuff. We now have a 2d4 bonus overall. And finally, no modded camp clothing or dyes with this one today, just a modded subclass. We have got all of the regular armour I showcased in the video, as well as the lush burgundy dye for the armour, because I wanted something that looked gaudy and, like, show-offy, and there's nothing like that than, like, a royal red and some gold. But yeah, no, that is the build, and overall, honestly, I went into this thinking this is such a stupid idea. It's not, it's just, I don't know what I'm doing for this one. And it ended up quickly becoming a favourite build of mine. I mean, yes, there's always the caveat of builds that rely on the potions being a bit of a pain in the ass, but if you're dedicated to playing a character that is this fucking stupid, you gotta commit to the bit wholeheartedly, and that 27 strength is doing a lot for you. And again, you're coming out of this with decent stats. I mean, the con dex could be a bit better, but 18 charisma's nothing to shout at, nothing to sneeze at. I mean, you could technically swap the con and charisma and kind of maybe mess around with the stats a bit more if you're not planning on taking actor. Again, durable kind of came up as a potential option there for boosting your constitution, but otherwise, you just have a lot of fun stuff going for you here. You get to be a wrestler. You're throwing people, and that's actually, how did I not say this? The spiked armor deals extra damage to enemies that are thrown. How did I forget to say that earlier in the video? I am such a muppet. There will be text on the screen when I'm talking about that feature, because, god damn it, I'm stupid. I apologise if this video seems a bit rushed. I'm trying to get this video out so that I actually have a video somewhat soon for you guys, because like I said, I have been very, very busy these past couple of days. And perhaps I shouldn't be pushing myself so hard, but I'm trying to make sure that I have at least a decent flow of videos before I go into patch 8, where I'm going to go absolutely insane, because I'm really hoping that drops soon. Because I'm kind of running out of ideas, and all of my good ideas, I look at the patch 8 subclasses and I think, would be better if it was one of those. Like, I got a Vecna build coming out that I was going to make, and then I was like, actually, no, that's better as a Shadow Sorcerer. Or the Dancer of Alistrai version 3, that's going to be a thing. I'm rambling. I'm going to stop now. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.